Okay, folks. So I'm John Halley. I'm co-founder of a Big Solar Co-op. I'm going to talk a little bit about Big Solar Co-op today, and I'm recording this session, and there'll be a chance afterwards to have a Q&A. So please keep your questions for them, and if you want to put them in the chat in the interim to help you remember, then please do. This is a photo of our first install, actually, a nice aerial photo of a big roof. So what we're going to cover, what is the Big Solar Co-op, why we think it's needed, a little bit about how we work, looking at some of our solar sites, who we are, and how people can invest. So this is a fundamental question. This is kind of a founding question for Big Solar Co-op. Why hasn't every big roof got solar? And it's really kind of originates in maybe discussions with people on sort of railway stations and in pubs, well, why are all these buildings in this town not yet covered in solar? To which the answer is not necessarily immediately clear. So if we go to the wider UK context, this is generation across all the different types of electricity generation. And you can see some really good news in here, coal falling off the grid completely. That's the dark red line here. And the rise of wind and also the rise of solar. But as you can see, the rise of solar has been, fairly moderate. It's not an incredible ski slope. And if we dig into the government figures, it's quite interesting, I think. This is a graph I've made from official figures produced by DESNZ, the government department. And I've broken solar deployment into three strands. So 0 to 50 kilowatt, which is kind of domestic solar and small rooftop. 50 kilowatt to 5 megawatt is large rooftops and small ground mounts. And then 5 megawatt plus that would pretty much all be ground mount solar fields, solar parks, solar farms. And you can see, the glory days of solar in the UK were when we had subsidy, the feed-in tariff here. At the end of the feed-in tariff, no prizes for guessing why it suddenly flattens out here. But you can see there's been a recovery in small scale solar and also in large scale solar. But there's this kind of tricky area in the middle here, which is, all the large roofs, and where it's, not exactly flatlined, but we're not actually adding that much every year. And so, what isn't getting built? Well, broadly speaking, rooftop solar on commercial buildings and rooftop solar on community buildings, schools, hospitals, factories. Sorry, I went ahead there. And the small scale, well, what's now considered small scale ground mount solar, 10 megawatts and below, where the commercial operators are not necessarily building very much at the moment. So the obvious question is, why not? Why isn't this happening? And I think one thing is that, most people with a large building have probably thought about solar at some point and realized it's a little bit more complicated than they initially expected, which has put a lot of people off. And if something's complicated, you need somebody to help you. And there's a big trust issue. So there's a perception, I think, that the solar industry is not always trustworthy, or that there are dodgy operators. To some extent, this probably has been true at some times. So there's a reticence for businesses and community buildings to go solar. And then this third one, which is return on investment is not high enough. And so that's, all solar companies will say, well, that's not true. But actually, realistically, on a large solar rooftop, if you can get 7, 8, 9 year payback on your investment, that's pretty good. Most real world scenarios, when taking into account the cost of the money, the capital, don't really beat that. And so for most businesses, that's just not good enough. I mean, we've spoken many times to people who said, well, I took the idea of solar to my finance committee, and they said, well, if it's not got a 3-year payback, I mean, in one case, an 18-month payback, then we ain't doing it. And I think those factors between them go to sort of explain why it hasn't happened. So what we do is we build and own solar on other people's buildings. It's a very familiar model, I expect, to everybody here. We sell them the power that we generate if there's anything that they don't use on site, we sell it to the grid, and they get a low price, lower than the grid import price for a long-term legal agreement. And so by doing this, we're trying to deal with these reasons that solar on rooftops is not happening. Okay, so it's complicated. People don't want to get into themselves, but we can manage all of it because we're planning and owning and operating the solar ourselves. The trust issue, so we're not for profit, which has really kind of changed the kind of conversations that you might have. So when people are inherently somewhat untrusting of solar companies, we go in as a not-for-profit. We're a carbon first entity, and we have conversations which are positive from the beginning. And then that return on investment, it may not be high enough for businesses investing their own capital, but our money ultimately comes from members of the public buying shares and bonds, but not expecting an enormous return, but a steady, good and fair return. And so we can make things work which commercial operators can't. One of the features, one of the things we work on a lot is ethical solar. So anybody who's interested in this subject should read this report, which is quite old now, 2019, where in detail we documented the fact that forced labor, effectively enslavement, is present in the solar supply chain. Unfortunately, some years later, we're still seeing that this is very likely still the case. And we buy solar panels which are where we can assure ourselves that the supply chain is clean. Sometimes we pay a premium for that, but it's something we're very proud to do and something we've done throughout, which is starting to have, I think, a small influence on others in the community energy sector, and even sometimes we have positive discussions with government, though we haven't actually really done much about it on the national level. Just covering our sort of business model, taking the year 2028 projections as a kind of a typical year or an easy to understand year. Almost all of our income comes from electricity sales, some very small types of other income. And then that goes in a number of places. Sorry, I keep on doing this. Expenses. There's an operating expense for solar in terms of service and maintenance, cleaning, etc. We have these core costs of developing new projects and our staff costs, depreciation, risk, and then the cost of finance. So our biggest single cost is the cost of capital, shares or bonds. Just going back to that risk factor, we do account for a risk factor because we're putting solar on buildings. What happens if the business goes bust? What happens if they change their energy use? What happens if they change their use of that building? There are a few different things that can happen there, which make it inherently, in a way, more risky than, say, putting solar on the ground. And we account for that in our financial projections. And then surplus, we're looking, our projection for 2028 is a modest amount of surplus. Any surplus we make, we're not for profit, it goes back into new solar. So these were our operational sites a year ago at this point, and these are our operational sites now. So you can see that we're building reasonably quick. Our aim at the moment is to build one a month. We're not quite there yet, but as you can see, we haven't been far off over the last year. And this is a real range of different types of size and types of building. So quite a few of these are supermarkets. There are factories. There's a leisure centre, a school. There's a hotel, community centre, doctor's surgery, a real range of types of building. And we're not really, we're looking for buildings which have a large roof, which use energy, and which are stable businesses or stable organizations. But apart from that, we're trying not to be applying many other criteria. We want to put solar on buildings that need solar. And you can see that in our outputs, that this is right almost from the beginning of when we were generating. Just one site there, but each color is a new site coming on stream, and you can see the highs are getting higher and the number of sites is getting larger over time. That's from our monitoring software. The other thing you can see, which is really interesting, is kind of how it gets used on site. So this is a snapshot from Twig stores in Matlock, one of our sites. And at the time I took this snapshot, we were generating 41 kilowatts, 17 was being used on site, and 24 was being exported to grid. And you can see how that works over the day. So if you look at this is midnight, and at midnight until early in the morning, all the usage for that site is being supplied by the grid, but the usage is pretty small. And as soon as the sun comes up, it's starting to be provided by solar. This is when everybody comes into work and switches everything on, and suddenly we're back into the grid power. But on this quite sunny day, solar started to take over, and in fact a large amount of their energy was provided from solar on that day. Oh, if you're interested, there's also on our website, on every page, we have this little thing up here showing how much we're generating across pretty much all our sites instantaneously. And if you click on it, you'll get a little bit more data like this. So we've looked at some of the sites we've built. We've got a lot of sites under consideration at the moment across a really wide range. 30 kilowatts, pretty much the smallest. We have some sites, some rooftop sites we're looking at, which are 1 megawatt or larger, and that same kind of variety of different types of building. One of the interesting collaborations we have is with Mid Counties Co-op, who are run supermarkets, co-op stores, and this is great because it's a thing that's happening between two different co-ops. So it's co-ops cooperating, but it's also we're working with a chain, so their sites are in lots of different places. Traditionally, community energy groups have been regionally based or based in one town, and so our national model enables us to do a chain with stores all over. And we've done 5. Actually, I think we've now done 6. So we've got 23 more to do. And these are the kind of shops we've built. This one in Daventry. Which one is this one? We've built this one in Bloxwich, and Church Stretton is upcoming. I like this slide because it's boring. You know, these are buildings that everybody's very familiar with in our communities. They've got big roofs. They use a lot of energy on site, but somehow in 2024, 2025, they didn't have solar. And that's the mission. You know, we're out there to go and make sure those buildings have solar. This is an interesting one we did this year. Hornsey Steels in Shropshire. They make things out of steel, and one of the things they make is roofing material. So they made their own roof, and then we've covered that roof in solar. And that's a really nice installation that's providing a large proportion of their energy. Another nice one in Southampton, Fremantle Community Centre. We visited, and they were looking at the data. Actually, it was a very sunny day, and they produced almost everything they used on site from solar. A small community centre. It's in the part of Southampton where you might have seen the press reports of gangs of teenage girls going around throwing stones. So we're hoping that they can't reach that far. And here's another nice one that we've just completed. Those photos are from while we're installing, but this rather nice kind of yin and yang turf roof, where we've found a system that we can use on that roof to add solar. A visitor centre in Shropshire. We've done a couple of mergers with existing co-ops where they'd been running those co-ops for a long time, running out of steam a little bit, and wanted to have a succession plan for somebody else to take over those co-ops, which we've successfully done. And their members have become our members. And in those cases, the members were given the opportunity to sort of come with us or have their money back. And almost all the members actually chose to join Big Solar Co-op, which is a nice vote of confidence in what we're doing. One of our flagship projects at the moment is Whiteborough Solar. So we don't do that much in the way of ground mount solar, and our focus is on rooftop, but we'll also do ground mount schemes if we're convinced that they're the right scheme. And this one's very interesting because one of the big things that people worry about with ground mount solar is, are you taking land which has high agricultural value, or are you building huge solar farms which change the landscape profoundly? And so this is a comparatively small site. It's also on land which used to be an open cast mine. So the whole area was mined for coal and has been infilled and is now very low grade agricultural land. We're also trying to make this one of we would love it to be the lowest carbon solar installed in the UK. There aren't really stats on the other ones, so it's hard to tell. But one of the things we're doing here is using a proportion of second life solar panels. So solar panels that are being taken down elsewhere, which we can reuse here, which have still got a lot of life in them. Our biodiversity plan on that site has a realistic prospect of increasing biodiversity. So we're taking a field, putting solar on it, and actually increasing the biodiversity of the site as we go. And that build's currently underway. The glamour of building a solar site, you start off basically, this is what the land's used for at the moment. Horses on a few horses in a field, which means that when you start to build a solar something, you have a digger with large amounts of horse muck. This shows you the extent of the mining before. So that's actually the outline of this pale red is the outline of our site, and the blue is all the area that was an open cast mine as recently as the 60s. So you can see that it's all within this kind of mining area. So who are we? This is a photo from our previous solar gathering. We do one every year. This was in Derby. So we have two types of member. We have volunteer members. We've got over 100 volunteer members from all across the UK. And they get involved in all kinds of different roles within the co-op. So some are trained in solar design. Some do triage of new sites that come in. We have local groups who work in their area, people who volunteer on the board, often people with a lot of experience in renewables, some people who go out and do talks and put out flyers, and also site champions. So people who have seen seen a roof in their area that they think should have solar, and they can go and contact those people, and we work with them, provide the infrastructure for them to get solar built, which has happened in a number of cases. We tried out our tools on Theo here, who bottom left, who just finished his GCSEs at the time, so 16. And we thought, well, how far can we get with Theo, who didn't start by knowing anything about solar, in a week? So on Monday, we taught him to do solar design, and he did this design on his local sports centre. On Tuesday, we optimized it a bit. Wednesday, we did a financial model with him. Thursday, he took that and presented it to the managing director. You can see him doing that there. And on Friday, he submitted a paper for the board of trustees at that sports centre. So it's a really nice illustration of what volunteers can do with our systems. And we're thickening the sauce a little bit on that by starting something that's going to be running in January, the Community Solar Foundation course. So pretty much the first comprehensive course for people to understand what it takes to be building solar under community models, which is funded by these two organisations. As I say, first of its kind. Our other type of member is our investor members. So our investor members are people, as the name suggests, who put in money. And we've raised over 2 million from our investor members. I'm very proud to see our geographical reach here. When we first came up with the idea of a UK-wide co-op, we really dreamed that we would be able to attract people from pretty much everywhere. I can see we've got some work to do in Northern Ireland, but most of the other gaps on the map are places where there not so many people. So it's yes, it's looking quite good. Structure wise, we're a cooperative society registered with the FCA. So broadly similar to other community energy organisations you might be familiar with. And like them, our voting power, the voting power of a member doesn't depend on their shareholding. Though in our structure, volunteer members, the people who put in their time, ultimately have 75% of a vote. Investor members can also become volunteer members. So it's not a one-way street. We have a board elected from our membership, and we have a staff team of 5 at the moment. We work with a range of different partners. We can't do it all ourselves, who provide things like installation services, marketing, legal, etc. One of the most important ones is Share Energy, which is a cooperative which I also co-founded, which has helped people set up renewable energy co-ops all across the UK since 2011. And really the idea for Big Solar Co-op originated within Share Energy. So in that sense, Share Energy is the kind of incubator of Big Solar Co-op and still provides a large range of services to Big Solar under contract. So there's no ownership relationship between the organizations. It's a purely contractual one. And we've also had grant funding. We're not in receipt of that much at the moment, but we had some of these organizations helped us to get started with some seed funding, and some of them are funding small projects that we do. But yes, we've got very great ambitions for the next round of rooftop sites particularly, and we need to raise more than £5 million over the next 2 years. And really our options are shares, so community shares, community bonds, or some type of loan. So and this is how it's gone so far. So you can see our share offer is running all the time. That's this orange mass down the bottom. And then we took a loan earlier this year. And then latterly, as many of you may have seen, we ran a bond offer over the summer where we added another 1.8 million in bonds. So we're approaching 5 million in capital raised one way or another already. So just looking at the loans, we've had short-term bridging loans from this great organization, We Have the Power, very flexible lender. Another great flexible lender is Resonance, who've lent us sort of medium-term funds. We've borrowed 800,000 from them. And then we're looking to see if we take on more long-term, larger amounts of debt in the future from the likes of banks, but we haven't got any of that kind of debt at the moment. And you've already seen that our share offer has increased over time. Worth just quickly covering the difference between a company share, kind of shares that people are maybe more familiar with, and our shares, which are technically withdrawable shares in a cooperative society. So purpose-wise, I mean, the purpose of a company share holding is generally to make money. And the bottom line is with us, the purpose of having a share is to make solar happen. Share value tends to vary quite a lot in a company. It tends to stay exactly the same in a society. But there's a return in both cases. In the company, it's a share of a profit, simply called a dividend. With our shares, we call that interest, reflecting a slight difference in the way it's seen. So what interest is a payment to reflect the fact that capital has been made available. The difference in practice comes if we made a huge profit, we would plow that back into solar. It wouldn't get redistributed to our members. Who can buy these shares? Well, most company shares, you would have to either self-certify as a sophisticated investor or go through some kind of broker. Whereas our shares can be directly marketed to the public. Risk-wise, yeah, actually the risks are the same. Ultimately, you can lose all your capital in both cases. And we do everything we can to minimize risk for Big Solar Co-op. One of the things that makes us potentially less risky is that most of the share capital goes into assets, into building these long-term solar assets, and solar is, relatively low risk technology itself. Solar panels tend to, if you look after them well, they tend to just keep going and producing power. But yes, the bottom line, as with any investment, is you can lose all your capital. Practically speaking, anybody over 16 can buy shares. There's a minimum of £100, and lots of people have invested £100. There's a maximum of 100,000. I don't think anybody has invested 100,000, though we have several people who've invested 50,000. And buying shares makes you an investor member. And you can do that from our website. There's a button on the website. Actually, it currently says invest, I think. And it's a very easy process, takes about 1 or 2 minutes. We pay interest annually, dependent on our performance. And our aim is to pay what we term a fair rate of interest, which we define as 2% above the bank base rate, or if a bank base rate drops below 3%, we'd keep our target interest payment as 5%. Interest is payable after 1 full year. So it takes, when somebody invests, we have to take that money, use it to build solar, and that solar has to operate for 1 full summer, basically, before we've got the kind of income that we would need to pay interest. So there's a gap between investing and the first interest payment. And interest payments could be paid out, so you can receive that as cash, as a bank transfer, or reinvested. So many of our members choose to reinvest. People often ask about withdrawal of shares. So one of our aims here is to keep liquidity going, so that if people want their share capital back, they can request a withdrawal and get it. So far, we've had a few requests for withdrawal, all of which have gone straight through. Of course, if somebody wanted to withdraw a large number of shares at a point where we'd spent all the money on new solar, they might have to wait. But our aim is to keep liquidity going as much as possible. You can't buy shares for children. There's a minimum age. They can, however, be inherited, and they're inheritance tax exempt up to the 1 million cap. Interest is taxable, though some people might find, if they've got relatively small holdings of shares overall, or investments overall, that they're within the personal savings allowance cap. So yes, for the details, go to our share offer document, which is always available on our website. And then there's also a little calculator there, which allows you to kind of have a look at impact. This is something we've tried, and there's probably a lot more measures that people would be interested in, but you can sort of move the slider here, put how much you might want to invest, and see what kind of impact that would have. The one I quite liked here was, you put in £1,000, and we're pushing enough gas generated electricity off the grid to save about 5% of the average UK carbon footprint. So that's pretty good bang for your buck compared to many other ways you could invest that money to decarbonize. So that's about it, folks. I'm sure there's questions. That's our website, or always, please don't hesitate to drop us an email. I get lots and lots of emails, very specific questions, and we always answer them in full. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.